Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Film and Whiskey Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Book.
And I'm Brad G.
And we are back with another special bonus episode. We are continuing our My Favorite Movie series today. Brad, we've done a lot of different kinds of bonus episodes over the years now. I still think this is my favorite series that we do. It's so much fun.
This and the top fives are continuously our longest standing type of bonus episode, and they each offer something unique. But I'm with you, man. Doing My Favorite Movie, it's just a blast to see whiskey people talk about movies. Because I watch and I listen to them talk about whiskey all the time. But how often do you get to talk about things like The Godfather or... what was our last one? Was it Friday? Next Friday?
No, it was Friday.
Yeah. So it's just a blast, man. And I am really, really jacked for who we have on today, Bob.
Yeah, we have a very special guest today. If you recall, a couple months ago, we had the national brand ambassador from Glenmorangie on, and he spent so much time talking about the sister distillery, Ardbeg, that I said, well, I need to reach out to Ardbeg at this point. We got to have them on the show. If we're going to have one Scotch distiller, we got to have the other, right? And I am such a big fan of the product they make. And Brad, you know that I have a very up and down, sketchy history with peated Scotch, but Ardbeg, for some reason, has always been one that is right in my wheelhouse.
It's because Ardbeg's a damn good whiskey, Bob.
It's exactly what it is, yeah. So we reached out to them, and we are joined today by Cameron George, who is the national brand ambassador. Cameron, how are you today, man?
Oh, fantastic. Very excited to sip some whiskey and talk about some movies, and also, I guess, regale you with some stories of the distillery and the sense of place that is Islay.
Yeah, oh man, I can't wait. So I guess let's start there. What's it like being a national brand ambassador for an international brand, right? Like, they are very much across the ocean and you are very much here. And how is it, especially in a market that is so saturated and dominated by bourbon right now? What's it like trying to carve out the Scotch niche in America?
Oh, man, a few really awesome questions right there, Bob. Also, very, just very astute observation that I am here in the United States and the distillery is over in Scotland there.
Dude, we're on top of our game here at the Film Whiskey Podcast.
It was a truly staggering amount of research that went into that one.
Absolutely.
I had to look at a map,
right? Yeah, I could tell. Yeah, so, the distillery Ardbeg is located on an island that's called Islay. That island has immense historical relevance to not only the people of Scotland, but then also of Ireland as well. But for us as whiskey enthusiasts around the world, I would argue that Islay is probably the most important place in the world when it comes to whiskey, when it comes to its history and its pilgrimage around the world. Scotland, even though I believe it's where whiskey was perfected, it's not where whiskey was invented. And it's not even where the art of distillation was invented. The art of distillation, dates way, way back to well beyond the 1400s when whiskey started to officially be distilled. Scotch whiskey is actually is very much so related to Irish whiskey, and Irish whiskey actually predates the category of Scotch whiskey. So if you're thinking about how knowledge of distilling a grain and then putting it into casks and letting it mature, that knowledge would have needed to pass from Ireland to Scotland. The closest place to both of those countries is actually Islay. And so as you kind of consider whiskey's pilgrimage from Ireland all the way over to Scotland, Islay would have been the first stopping point, and it would have been the high seat of power for not only the Lords of the Isles, but then also one of the most densely populated in terms of the amount of distilleries that were located on the island way back even before 1815, which is when most of the distilleries became licensed and legalized. Before that, there would have been upwards of 25, 30 small distilling operations operating under cover of darkness. So that's why you'll notice that, a lot of the distilleries on Islay have establishment dates of 1815, is because not only was it a great place in terms of the region to make whiskey, but also you were able to escape taxation as well.
So we've gotten ourselves up to 1815. Where do you come into play? I imagine it's a bit later than that. I'm applying the same logic I used to determine the ocean in between our two countries here. But how did you get into this game? I imagine that you don't just kind of wake up one day and you're the national brand ambassador. I'm sure there was a tremendous amount of work that went into it. So maybe tell us a little bit of your history with the brand and also your whiskey history. What got you into drinking whiskey in the first place?
I found whiskey just absolutely enthralling ever since I was a bartender. That's, I guess, probably the genesis point for my love of not only Scotch whiskey, but the category of whiskey. Comes from the years that I spent behind the bar. I've always loved spirits that cause you to think, spirits that cause an emotional reaction that evoke the senses. I think that there's a really beautiful relationship between the way that humans smell, eat, drink, consume experiences, in the way that those things can channel and immediately spark memories, right? When I dive my nose into a glass of whiskey, I'm not only experiencing what's happened in that glass of whiskey right now, but I'm also reliving, previous experiences. For me, being raised in the Pacific Northwest, there's a chemical compound called petrichor that occurs whenever there's immense rainfall immediately after it being fairly warm during the day, and that it starts to kind of smell like the cement, like wet cement almost. That's an aromatic that has resonated with me because of the place that I grew up in, right?
Right.
So whenever you're smelling a glass of whiskey, you're actually reliving these things that are called olfactory hallucinations or olfactory memories, right? So there's a relationship between the way that your olfactory bulb, your papilla, your taste buds work together to communicate things and experiences that you've already lived through. And that to me is incredibly beautiful. So when I first started studying whiskey, I immediately, like many people, gravitated towards bourbon. And as I started traveling from distillery to distillery, meeting a lot of very famed distillers and meeting some incredible personalities and drams along the way, one of the things that began to dawn on me is that the bourbon whiskey world, or at least the American whiskey world as we know it currently, is much more of a closed fist than an open universe. 150 so odd distilleries operating in Scotland. And those distilleries are, for better or worse, handcuffed to using one single grain malted barley. The distillery of origin can only be one place, and it can't have any additives. It can't have any, it can't have anything to adulterate the spirit in any way, shape, or form. So for me, I just, as I started to fall in love with whiskey, to fall in love with whiskey meant to fall in love with Scotch whiskey ultimately. And I was very lucky to work at some of, the US's most incredible whiskey bars. I'm thinking of 611 Supreme here in Seattle, which was the first cocktail bar I ever ran. The whiskey bar, quite literally named the whiskey bar here in Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
Cannon as well. So as I started to find my footing as a bartender and as a whiskey enthusiast, it meant that I started entering cocktail competitions as well. And yes, I do believe that you can make beautiful whiskey cocktails, specifically beautiful Scotch whiskey cocktails. So I ended up winning a cocktail competition that took me to Islay for the very first time in 2014 or 15, I believe. And it was for a sister distillery named Bruichladdich. And I ended up wanting to tour as many distilleries as I could the day before I started my stint at Bruichladdich. And I went to Ardbeg and no other distillery. I spent 6 hours at Ardbeg just nerding out. It was the first time I met Jackie, and I fell in love with that place. And so I brought that love back to Seattle. And for years, I continued to be a huge proponent and supporter of the brand until ultimately I joined the ambassador team. And then a year later, I had an offer from Ardbeg to be our national ambassador and educator on behalf of the brand. So it's it's a serendipitous story, and it's one that it's been the absolute privilege of my life so far, and I cannot wait to continue to be out on the road sharing this delicious, heavily peated juice all over the world.
Yeah, I was going to say, Cameron, if I can be very honest, I freaking love Scotch. Bob's like a little bit iffy on it from time to time, but we bring him along. I think for me though, Ardbeg, it offers one of the more unique expressions that I've ever had in the world of peat. And I'm curious, like, hit me with, why is it that Ardbeg, like, what sets it apart? What is it that's different about Ardbeg versus, you know, the Laphroaig, the Bruichladdich, the other options that you have when you're looking for a peat bomb?
I think it really boils down to something that we refer to as the peaty paradox. It's this juxtaposition between the most heavily peated malted barley being utilized as our base ingredient, right? You know, when you think about the ingredients of Scotch whiskey, there are really only 4 of them. It's malted barley, it's water, it's yeast. And I would also argue that the barrel is technically an ingredient as well, because it's kind of the culprit behind about 60 to 80% of a whiskey's flavor. The rest is going to be due to process and also, also the distillery's kind of thumbprint as well. So for me, one of the interesting elements of the peaty paradox when it comes to Ardbeg is, yes, the most heavily peated malted barley in regular production being utilized. But 7 out of the 9 distilleries on Islay currently receive their malted barley from Port Ellen Maltings. Port Ellen Maltings is not calling Ardbeg Distillery unless their phenolic range, their parts per million of a chemical compound called phenol, which is what you're looking for anytime you're talking about peated whiskey. We're not answering the phone unless it's over 55 parts per million. You know, I would classify anything as over 30 parts per million as a heavily peated whiskey. Our good friends over at Laphroaig like a spec that's about 45 to 55, kind of right in there.
Okay.
Lagavulin is taking a little bit less. But then one of the other things that separates us is actually part of Ardbeg's, call it myth, legend, and lore. I mean, we're on a movie podcast right now as well, so we might as well start talking about equal parts whiskey and also some legend and lore as well. So, you know, one of the things I think is most interesting about the lore of Ardbeg is that there's a piece of equipment on the stills at the distillery that nobody knows when it was installed, and nobody knows what the original purpose for its installation is, but we can theorize. So this piece of equipment is called a purifier, and effectively it's essentially just a copper pot that hangs off of what's called the line arm. And at random, that pot is grabbing heavier, weightier congeners, compounds, lipid acids, free fatty lipid acids as well, and it's throwing them down into the bottom of the still to go through the process again. So whereas we don't have heights, or we don't have stills that are the height of a fully grown male giraffe, we're able to force a lot of the reflux that you see in Glenmorangie's distillate onto Ardbeg's distillate by using this purifier. So it's one of the things that gives you, you know, yes, heavily peated, but then also a refinement and a polishing off. I'm currently sipping Ardbeg 10-year-old, and I think that that's actually the best representation of the influence of the purifier, because I would describe this whiskey as, yes, incredibly smoky and very rich and decadent, but also at the exact same time, there are some ethereal notes to kind of find in there. It's, for me, one of the most beautiful distillates in the world, and that's, again, why I choose to be an Ardbeg fan, or an Ardbegian, as we call ourselves.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, we kind of jumped headfirst into the world of peated Scotch when we tried Laphroaig 10. And, you know, for me especially, and I'm not here to disparage anyone's whiskey, but I think the flavor of the Laphroaig for me was just, I couldn't get past the peat and just the smokiness of it as the only note that I was picking up. And we've tried a few since then, and the Ardbegs especially stand out to me as, you know, they have a really, really great bite to them. Just the alcohol tingle is there in ways that I think some others aren't. But there's an underlying sweetness, I think, to the mash as well, which is really, really nice. And I think it complements that peat smoke just beautifully. But Cameron, I want to take things back a little bit, or zoom out even further from some of the more scientific things we've been discussing here. Our audience is comprised mostly of people who are just getting into the world of whiskey. And so we talk to them about, you know, bourbon, rye, why they should try each of these different varieties of whiskey. And Scotch is one that has, you know, it's taken a little bit of doing, you know, even for a person like me. So we had Dan come on from Glenmorangie, and it's a nice, easy pitch when you're pitching a soft Highland Scotch. And yet here we are talking about a peated Islay Scotch. I guess, what is your, like, elevator pitch to someone who's never tried a peaty scotch before. Maybe they've stuck their nose into a Glencairn of it before, and they're just like, I don't know if I can do this. Convince our listeners to take the plunge.
Yeah, I mean, if I can say one more thing, the big complaint I've always heard about scotch, and this is like before I even ever drank whiskey, I just remember people being like, scotch just smells like gasoline. And like, I remember the very first time I smelled scotch, like a peated scotch for this, I was kind of like, I kind of see what people are saying. But the more I've drank it, the more I'm like, well, they're just dead wrong. This is delicious. But, there's these weird things that people say about it. So, yeah, give us your elevator pitch. Where are you at with like, hey, man, you need to try this heavily peated scotch?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that wards most people off or kind of gives or instills fear in people is that smoke, right? We have a strange relationship with smoke, but, our ancestors have been utilizing smoke for thousands of years, right? Before we were able to have air fryers in our houses and whatnot, we were cooking with gasoline. We were cooking, over overexposed log fires. We've always had an immense relationship with smoke. But I don't necessarily believe that smoke is one flavor. I actually think it's a family of more or less 5 categories of types of smoke, or at least that's how we try to accent and speak about smoke with Ardbeg. So whenever you're diving your nose into a glass of whiskey and you do smell smoke, look a little bit deeper and you'll start to find that there's a couple of different families. There's going to be a savory style of smoke, something that's also a little bit medicinal, maybe something that's a little bit more coal driven, maybe something that's a little bit more herbaceous, and then definitely a style of smoke that is a little bit more woody or wood focused as well. Here in the States, we would be fist fighting each other if we told, somebody from Carolina that Carolina style barbecue is the exact same as Mesquite, Texas style, barbecue. So, we accept that analogy when we're talking about food. And it's only right that as we continue to expand our palates, that we extend that line of thinking into what we drink as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I actually want to do a little exercise with you while we're on the topic of whiskey for the every person. If you had to pair this brand, just in general, a nice, let's call it the Ardbeg 10. If you had to pair the Ardbeg 10 with not just any food item, no fancy cheeses, no charcuterie boards, a fast food item, right? It's late and it's, I need my 4th meal and I'm going to go grab something from the drive-thru and come home and enjoy it with a nice pour of Ardbeg 10. What are you pairing it up with?
Okay, I'm going in the direction of sweet. So I'm going to go with a vanilla, probably like a vanilla shake from McDonald's and one of the apple pies from McDonald's as well.
You
get a little bit of that cinnamon, you get a little bit of the apple and the sweetness, and then you get the creaminess from the ice cream as well. I'm going to get that as soon as we're done here, actually.
I just want our audiences to know that we did not prep Cameron with that question. You came up with that answer like so incredibly quickly. Have you done this before?
No, not that pairing, but I'm going to experiment with it later on this afternoon. Another interesting one that I have for you as well is off of the hidden menu, the secret menu at Jamba Juice. There is a white gummy bear Jamba Juice smoothie that I can neither confirm nor deny that I may have put Ardbeg 10 into.
I love these pairings though, because I feel like so often people take the savory route with a nice peated scotch. I was expecting you to say something like a steak burger or something like that, but to hear you go with the apple pie from McDonald's, I actually think that would be an even better pairing. I cannot wait to try that out one of these days.
Absolutely.
Early on in my whiskey drinking career, I quickly realized that not everyone I interact with is interested in drinking the water of life neat. And so I had to come up with another way to get people to drink whiskey with me. Cocktails are the easiest way to warm a friend's heart, and yet many people don't have the time or energy to learn everything it takes to be a bartender. Luckily for you, you really don't have to. Route 23 is a flavored simple syrup company that is making one of the best products on the market and will absolutely transform your view on mixology. Want to make something that tastes like fall? Grab their maple cinnamon and give it a go. What about something light and refreshing? How about some pear rosemary? Want to get spicy? Kick it up a notch with their cucumber habanero. Whichever direction you go, making mixed drinks for your friends has never been easier than when you have Route 23 on your shelf. And right now, you can do it for even less. Use the code WHISKEY10 at checkout and get 10% off your next order. You can find them at route23.com. That's ROOT, the number 23.com.
All right, man, let's pivot here. I'm going to get you off the hot seat a little bit. I feel like we bring on guests and we make them give their pitches for their brands, but we're going to let you relax a little as we move into talking about your favorite film. And you sent us a list that has 4 movies on it, and it's like action movies and a gangster film and a really fun musical. There's a ton of variety here. So let's try to narrow it down. If you had to pick just 2 movies to talk about today, which 2 are on your mind? Which would you like to talk about?
Oh, okay. If I have to narrow it down from 4 to 2, I would go ahead and say, I would say The Sound of Music is probably one that I'd like to discuss the most today.
Come on, let's go.
Followed by Rush Hour. I would select The Sound of Music because it was a movie that I watched maybe 2 or 3 times a week with my grandma when I was a kid. So there's an immense love of that. And she was an opera singer. I can't sing a lick, but for some weird reason, I have a strange fondness of musicals.
I love that. Yeah, we reviewed Sound of Music on a regular episode a few seasons ago, and I spent most of the episode just kind of remarking at the way that movie looks. It is one of the most beautifully filmed movies you will ever see. And now that it's been restored, I mean, it is like pristine.
Absolutely.
But the director, Robert Wise, he's very famous for having edited the movie Citizen Kane. He also directed West Side Story, which might be my favorite movie musical of all time. But there is just something, in addition to everything else we can talk about with the beautiful score and the Rodgers and Hammerstein songs, there's something about the visuals of that movie that are just, I mean, it never ceases to take my breath away.
Man, I was sure that you were going to say there was something about Maria, but man, missed opportunity, Bob.
Missed opportunity for sure.
All right, so when you watch Sound of Music, like what are you watching for? What keeps bringing you back? Is it one of the performances? Is it specific musical numbers? Like what draws you in after having seen it 50, 60, 70 times now?
Yeah, I think honestly, Liesel's story, the way that she, I guess, rebels against her own family and upbringing, only to realize that there's value and strength in her family itself as well.
Yeah,
I'm somebody who had a little bit of a falling out with some of my family members, but then ultimately kind of came back into the fold as well. I think it's a very natural kind of coming of age story. And that aspect of it, for me, when I was growing up, was always kind of intriguing. Also the cinematography of the movie as well. It just the sweeping wide shots were just so ahead of their time, they felt. Because originally, 1960s, I want to say.
Yeah, 65.
65. Yeah, exactly. Just felt that they were very much so different than anything else that I had seen at the time. And then also growing up here in Seattle and, going to my grandmother's house after school basically every day, there were slim pickings. So I feel like the love of the movie was also forced on me, but then something that I absolutely just kind of fell in love with as well.
Yeah, it's wild. We really early on in our podcast, we were privileged to have movie critic Josh Larson on. And he talked about like one of the most simple things you can do if you want to start, like really observing and appreciating cinema as art is just pause the movie at random times of the film and say, man, what do I like about this scene? Like what's interesting to me on the screen right now? And I feel like you could do that with nearly every single second of The Sound of Music and go, oh, well, yeah, this is just, flat out gorgeous. I like everything that's going on here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. Even everything down to the framing of the movie is absolutely fantastic. I would say if I had a least favorite character, though, this may surprise you. I would absolutely say George Von Trapp. Even though
Oh, no love for my boy Chris Plummer.
no, there's absolutely no love there. For me, I assumed that it was an easy reach for him to fall in love with Maria. I was like, for the betterment of your children, sir, why are you bringing this woman into your house, to be an employee, and then also falling in love with her? Like the power dynamic there, the power dynamic there always read as awkward to me.
Listen, I'm totally with you, but at the same time, I mean, he is in the enviable position of falling in love with Julie Andrews. And also, like, I think I commented this on the episode, Brad, just the costuming of Captain Von Trapp. Like, it's just, the fit is absolutely ideal. Like, I truly envy his clothes in that movie.
Absolutely. 100%. As somebody who, I very much so pride myself on a wardrobe that is, let's say, never timid, I guess is probably the best way to put that. There is a little bit of envy for his double-tailed jackets as well there.
Well, let's go ahead and switch to your second movie. If the first one was one that was kind of, foisted upon you, I have a feeling that you may have discovered the second one for yourself. So let's talk about Rush Hour here.
100%. Yeah. Rush Hour, I feel like that's definitely a movie that actually the entire franchise, I've always just had an immense amount of respect for anybody who is able to translate what they've done in the comedic kind of in the comedic world onto the silver screen. For me, has just been like that. It takes an immense amount of skill to excel in both of those areas, because oftentimes, not all comedians can step up onto the silver screen and onto off of the stage, as it would be, and hold their own there as well. And I find that the comedic elements of that movie were just absolutely amazing as well.
Well, and you've got Jackie Chan I don't want to say it's like the height of his powers, but I've looked at Jackie Chan's career, and it does seem like in some ways he was 20 to 30 years ahead of his time. And
1,000%.
I think right now, America is finally, thankfully, starting to appreciate international cinema, like in a big way. Just the fact that like Parasite won the Oscar a couple years ago is something that never would have happened 20 years ago. And you go back and look at some of Jackie Chan's movies from before he came to America, like the Police Story movies. They are like incredible choreography. You'll never see anything like that again. And by the time he comes to America, like, he's still in incredible shape. He can still do all of these stunts for himself. But I do kind of feel like, man, I wish we had caught on to Jackie Chan and appreciated him earlier than we got him,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Especially Jackie Chan being a student of Bruce Lee as well.
Yeah.
Obviously being raised here in Seattle, Bruce Lee is very much so a hero here in Washington State, having attended University of Washington, and also having a beautiful burial site up here as well. So anybody who's a student of Bruce Lee's, or at least an immense fan of Bruce Lee's, is always always good money in my book as well. But yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. That movie, to me, did an incredible job of both highlighting the fact that there are superstars that live outside of the United States, and that there needs to be a deconstruction of I would even refer to it as Eurocentrism or Eurocentricity. As far as it kind of pertains, I think that was one of the first times that that we looked at the trope of action star, and it was somebody who previously would have been othered, if that makes sense. And so that movie in that way did wonders for inclusivity as well.
You mean they didn't need somebody like, Arnold or Sylvester to carry an action film?
Exactly. 100%.
Well, and on top of that, I have to bring us back to Chris Tucker for a second. He is one of those people that, he's kind of been out of the spotlight for a while. I think he did everything he needed to do, and now he's just kind of resting on his laurels, as he should. I think that the only drawback to that is that like young people I know today don't know anything about him. And they're like, oh yeah, he's that old comedian that, used to do comedy. And I'm like, no. You don't understand how much power he held in the realm of comedy and how just flat out funny he was. You can't imagine this movie without such a perfect pairing between Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker.
Amazing. Yeah, they were just absolutely perfect. And, to speak on Chris Tucker as well, I mean, how many great and classic movies has he given us? I mean, we think about Friday, Fifth Element. Oh, how could I even forget? Yep. How did I leave Fifth Element off of my list, actually?
Yeah, I mean, just to be able to rock the hair and everything else that he's pulling off in that movie it's a feat of its own.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think we could literally sit here and talk about all of this for hours and hours on end. We might do that after we wrap up here, but this is a bonus episode. We only have so much time. We don't want to take, all of Cameron's night. So any last thoughts on Rush Hour? Here's a question for you. I just realized, if they remade The Sound of Music, what roles would you put Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker in if they were to be in The Sound of Music?
A little crossover here. Okay. All right. That I feel like is a really good question. I feel like, oh my gosh, what was his name? Max. He was the captain's.
Yeah.
I feel like Chris Tucker would do a stunning job as Max, because he's just a little debonair. His personality is boisterous, to say the least. God, but where to put Jackie Chan?
Yes, that is the only option.
That's perfect. Absolutely. You're 1,000% right. He's great. Even in Rush Hour, he's great with Sun Yoon, the daughter of the consulate.
100%.
So, yeah, I feel like that's absolutely 100%.
We just found a way to improve upon maybe the most perfect musical ever made. And that's why you bring Cameron George on the show, ladies and gentlemen.
I like it. I'm here
Cameron,
for it.
I got to say, man, thank you so much for joining us today. As we wrap up, is there anything from the brand that you'd like to plug while you're here?
Yeah, absolutely. Ardbeg has continued to be, immensely supported by our Ardbeg committee members. We're now about 150,000 members strong across the world. If you would like to get inside information as to the new releases coming out from the distillery, because they are very, very sought after, the best way to go about doing that is to actually join the Ardbeg committee at ardbeg.com. It gives you the best inside track as to communication directly from the distillery. And then also, please feel free to shoot me DMs and like and follow me at ardbegcam on Instagram as well.
Well, once again, we want to say thank you to Cameron. We want to say thank you to Ardbeg, the brand that is providing our whiskey for this month. We are like midway through these 4 beautiful bottles of Ardbeg, and I am just enjoying the hell out of it, Brad. Cannot recommend them highly enough. We'll be back on Monday with another regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.